Hi, and welcome to the Certified Information Security Systems Professional Video Course. My name is Sean Gerber, and I'm going to be your instructor on this course. Hey, before we get started, I want to give you a little bit of background about myself and kind of tell you where I came from. Well, I've been in the cybersecurity space for over 18 years now, but I started off in a very different place than where I am today. I went to school to be an airline pilot in the University of North Dakota, where it's very, very cold, and flew airplanes up there working to be as a flight instructor. I eventually ended up in the military, and I ended up flying B-1 bombers out of an Air Force base in the middle of the United States. Did that for about 7 years and just totally loved it. Nothing better than flying super fast and super low. It was an incredible experience, and I loved every minute of it. However, things changed, and as these things change, I ended up getting an opportunity to work with a group as a Air Force Red Team. So we started up an Air Force Red Team and focused specifically on penetration testing for networks and physical aspects of facilities, global facilities for the U.S. government. I did that for about 11 years. So transition from the military, my total experience in the military was 24 years, but 7 of it flying B-1 bombers and then another 11 of that in the Air Force Red Team. And doing that, I actually ended up finally as the commander of this Air Force Red Team. Well, as such, I had approximately 82 people that worked for me, and we would test everything, you name it, under the sun. We would hack into systems. We would physically break into systems. It was an incredible job to do, and totally loved every minute of it. After that, I left the military, and I joined a multinational, working as a senior security architect for them. Did that for about 2 years. And then moved on as the operations manager for a security operations center, so a SOC typically known. And all the alerts that would come in for a facility would come in through that, for this multinational, by approximately about 100,000, 140,000 people all over the globe. And I was a security operations center manager for that. After that, I was fortunate enough to be selected as a chief information security officer for a multinational, and it's a global organization, and we do very well. We're about a multi-billion-dollar company, and so that's my day job. But the purpose of that, though, is also I've been a CISSP now since 2009, and I've been an opportunity to see multiple aspects of cybersecurity. So from dealing from the hackers and the individuals that are potentially trying to break into your networks, to being up into an executive level position where I'm trying to manage a large organization and the security around that. So I've been very blessed to see that from beginning to end, basically the beginning of the genesis to where I'm at this point, which hopefully is not the end of my career. But basically my certifications, I am a CISSP, like I said, from 2009. I've also been a Law of Data Security and Investigations. I'm certified in that, and I'm certified as a Security Plus and Networks Plus person as well. I've been teaching people for over 24 years, starting off as a flight instructor, to working in the military, teaching military personnel how to protect their networks, and to finally teaching enterprise personnel and people that work within a very large company how to protect their networks and their data and watch out for other things that could cause issues within a typical organization. And I'm really excited about teaching you about the CISSP. All right, let's get started. We're going to get into the confidentiality, integrity, and availability topic. And we commonly call this, at least I do, the CIA triad or the triangle. I think they call it the triad in some cases, but I like the CIA triangle better. The objective of this is to understand and apply concepts of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And we'll get into what those actually mean. So confidentiality. As we talked about in this objective, you need to understand how does it work. Well, it is the secrecy of the data so that it's not disclosed or made available to others. And its a goal is to reduce unauthorized individuals or entities and or processes the ability to access the data. And you're going to find out, especially in your security career, that there's not just individuals that can access the data. There's many systems that their whole goal in life is to access that data as well. So this just doesn't matter about an individual. It could be a process or a entity of some kind that may need access to this information. Also is that only the person with authorized access has got access to the data. And so you can there's plenty of times where you will have folders that'll be set aside that everyone has access. Well, the goal is that it's only authorized individuals or authorized systems or processes that have access to the data. So we're going to break this into confidentiality maintained is the next bullet you can see there. What does that really basically means is that you want to be able to maintain the confidentiality of your data. And here's some key things for you to consider around maintaining that confidentiality. First one is encryption, and that's when it's either at rest, which many people will say data is never at rest, and it usually isn't. But when it's sitting still, or at least attempting to sit still, and then the other time is when it's being transmitted or sent someplace. Now, disk encryption will help you with data at rest. So if you've got a hard drive that's got a disk drive in it, or even an SSD, which is a solid state drive, anywhere the data is potentially just sitting in one location, USB drive even, is there encryption involved with protecting the data? Now, if you're transmitting the data to a separate location, you probably need to have some way to wrap it up and protect it, right? So hackers did this in the past. It was that I would intercept information, and email is a really good way of doing that. And it's all in plain text. And it's all available for people to look at. Well, then there's ways to protect that. So you can do that either externally using SSL or internally using IPsec tunnels. And many people think that when they go to a website and they want to go, say, their online banking, they all look for the HTTPS, which basically says it's quote unquote secure. Well, it's basically a certificate saying that, yes, this is a secure site, that you trust this site based on the certificate, and therefore will allow an SSL connection over port 443. Now, that whole purpose is in place for external communications. In some cases, like just to say SAP, which is your ERP solution, and it's designed mainly to everything that goes on inside your business can go through an ERP solution, such as SAP. There's PeopleSoft, other kind of software variants out there for that. But this data that's moving around is sensitive. So if you have this data, you might want to incorporate IPsec tunnels between the different servers to protect the data from the business network, because you assume that the network is trusted, but at the end of the day, it's there's more people probably inside your networks than you realize. So that's encryption. The other one is password storage, and then this would be vaults that would probably deal with this. So you can store your passwords in as simple as a piece of paper, an Excel spreadsheet, or in a password storage vault. Now, if you're dealing with a piece of paper, that helps because you're honestly keeping it in separate from online. So only you would have access unless you leave the piece of paper someplace. But a lot of people put the passwords in Excel spreadsheets. But what they don't do is they don't protect it with a password. Now, if you protect that Excel spreadsheet with a password, is that a good thing to do? Probably not the best. But is it the worst thing you could do? No. There's also password vaults such as LastPass, also enterprise solutions like CyberArk that allow you to keep these passwords or critical data that you feel very, very important in these vaults and protects them from being hacked. There's also access controls, which is the folders, the applications, or any place where data is potentially stored and or transmitted. So you'll find out that when you have a folder and you allow people access to this folder, there's rights to it. Now you can make it available to everyone, and there might be use cases where, you know what, that's okay. But the bottom line is that you need to look at ways to store it and protect it. But this is not just through the encryption and the password vaults and all those stuff. Is actually the blocking and tackling is limiting access to these folders and applications through specific rights. Bill Smith has access to this folder, but Fred Smith should not have access to the folder. Simple things like that. Now, how is confidentiality compromised? Well, it could be where the data is shipped in plain text or stored in an unprotected format. Since you put it in an email and you ship it out the door, you put it on a USB drive and you don't encrypt the USB drive. That's just basically foolishness, right? Now, again, that depends. If your data isn't important and it's not that big a deal, then there's no problem with it. But if your data is of sensitivity, you need to put adequate controls in place. Another one is passwords being shared or stored in an unprotected file structure. Kind of we talked about this earlier. If you just put them all on a piece of paper, I'll give you an example. I was at a bank one time and I was talking to an individual who's a friend of mine and was the manager of the bank. And I asked him, I said, so do you guys have a password policies in place? Oh, yes, we do. And then I said, well, where do you store your passwords? You have like a password vault? And he goes, no, I just store them in my email. Okay, that's just not good, right? We had a little education after that, and he's like, well, I didn't see the big deal. This is a bank manager. So, yeah, it's just a bit scary at times. Or everyone has access to a folder or file structure. Now, that, again, comes back to, do you audit it? Do you provide oversight to make sure that not everybody has access to this folder? And also employees being socially engineered or phished, right? Email phishing that comes out, people click on a link, it allows them access into their environment, but it's unauthorized access. The challenge is, though, is the moment you click on that link, you give them free reign into your environment. Other considerations around confidentiality, data sensitivity. And this kind of comes back to the first point I talked about with data being shipped in clear text or unprotected. If your data is not sensitive, it doesn't really matter. I mean, in reality, if it is sensitive, then you need to put protections in place to protect it. Intellectual property, critical business processes, those kind of things need to be protected in a far different manner than just my recipe for queso. Okay, very different. Operator decision rights. Who owns the data? I've seen this time and time again. There's no real clear owner, or there is, but you got to ask 350 people to find out who that clear owner is of the data. And the problem comes into is no one seems to really know. And when no one knows, it's called tragedy of the commons. When nobody really knows, nobody takes care of it. And so therefore, it just goes delinquent and people get access to it that shouldn't have access to it. And many people just make the assumption IT is the owner of it. Well, no, that's not the case. And so if you're in an IT organization, you need to consider that if someone's saying you're the owner of the data, no, do not take that. Do not be the owner of the data. Someone is the rightful owner and they're shirking their responsibility. Integrity. So here's integrity. Now this comes down to the same concept of you have integrity. You say you're going to do what you're going to do. Well, this is dependent upon confidentiality of the data. If you're confident that the data is protected and the data is original, that's what integrity is. It maintains the assurance around the accuracy and completeness of the data. Now, as an example, you go online and you say you see a doctor and the doctor put your lab results online. Come to find out the doctor's been hacked. You find that out. Then you start to ask yourself, well, maybe my results aren't correct. Maybe, just maybe, I don't have cancer, or maybe I do. Again, that's just, if you can't ensure the integrity of the data, it causes a lot of problems. Data cannot be modified or unauthorized in an undetected manner. Now, undetected manner. The thing is there's times when you have data that you can't protect everything. And honestly, there is nothing out there. I should say nothing. There's probably something, but nothing that I'm aware of that will protect everything 100% of the time. There's just no way. Eventually something's going to happen. And so therefore you have to have things in place to detect that are unauthorized access. Now this can happen in transmission or in storage, but you basically have to, if you can't trust the data either while it's transmitted or while it's being stored, that's an integrity issue with the data. You must have assurances or process to ensure the proper change of the data, like the change management process that goes into it. So data needs to change. As an example, you have an Excel spreadsheet and you put stuff into the spreadsheet. Well, it has a process by which you add and change data. You save the data. You assume that by saving it, it's protected, right? But if you find out that every time you save it, it sends a copy of it to somebody else, or it changes the data after saving, well, then you lose the integrity of that specific information. So how is it maintained? Security mechanisms. They will help to ensure the data hasn't been compromised. And that can be done through encryption while it's transit at rest. It also can be done through proper access to the data via various authentication protocols. Single sign-on. If you have Ping ID or any other type of single sign-on product, we'll talk about that here. That will help provide authentication. And it's keeping the unauthorized individuals and people away from the data. That's what the proper access controls are in place. Finally is that you have some level of oversight, i.e. audit, or even could be just an internal assessment of the information. And this can be done through proper logging and monitoring. All of these things can be put in place to ensure that, you know what, if somebody breaks in and gets access to my information, what did they get? How did they get it? Do I have a log of what they got? That almost is just as much importance as finding out that they actually hacked into your network. Because if you can't prove anything, you really puts doubt into if your data is even valid anymore. And I've seen people blow away, completely redo an entire network because they weren't sure what data was involved or if the bad guys are in their environment anymore or not. Now, how is integrity compromised? Data is transmitted and restored in an unprotected manner without encryption, right? So if you get your thumb drive and you're taking it around and it's not encrypted and it's got sensitive data, that's not good, right? So that's how your integrity can be compromised. Inadequate authentication. Same USB drive. You don't have a password on it. The data is just sitting out there in the open. Sensitive data, I say. If it's not sensitive, then maybe you don't care. But it's a risk-based approach. Systems are not logged or monitored, right? So that I've seen this as well. You'll come out and you'll say, hey, this system has got all my critical super secrets on it. Well, okay, what kind of logging and monitoring do we have on it? We ain't doing it. Why not? Well, we just never thought about it. So if you're not watching it, how do you know that the systems are still good and there's not something hasn't happened to that data on those systems? Availability, the last one of the CIA triangle or triad. Its authorized items are granted a timely and uninterrupted access. So what does that mean? It means it has to be available anytime you need it. If it isn't, then it's not available. So if you have a situation where your wire or your broadband at your home does not stay up, it's not available. If you're trying to run your job and your business and your broadband or your ISP doesn't allow connectivity, it kind of is on again, off again, it's not available. It's pretty hard to run a job or run a business when that happens. The second item is high availability. What does that mean? So high availability is that in the event that you have an outage, and we'll talk about disaster recovery and business continuity later on in the CISSP, but you have a situation that occurs and you have one firewall that protects your network, right? Well, if that one firewall goes down, one of two things happens. One, your network's wide open, or two, your network's completely shut off. Well, that's bad, right? Either one of those is a bad option. One's maybe a little worse than the other, but they're still bad. So that's what will happen is people will put in another firewall so that you have redundant systems. That's high availability. And these systems can be set up so that one firewall is running all the traffic, and in the event that it dies and tips over, another one kicks in, or they could be load balanced and sharing the load between them. That's high availability. It includes efficient and uninterrupted access, and we're talking about denial of service attacks. Now, those kind of attacks can occur from internally your network or externally, and it's denying access or services to your network. And it's amazing how that can happen with something so simple as putting new systems in with old systems. And then the last one is intentional or unintentional accidents, right? Somebody accidentally with air quotes, deletes an entire server. Okay, so how is it maintained? So power, UPS, uninterrupted power supplies can help keep the power and keep availability up and operational. The other thing is having, we talked about earlier, high availability systems and devices, hardware that's in place to ensure that the systems stay operational in the event of a failure, right? Something goes down, you've got a backup. It's really kind of simple, right? And then finally is policies and procedures. And what that is disaster recovery, business continuity plans that are in place that you can kick off and get running in the event that something goes out. Now, you'll see the main thing with this, though, is that you need to have a testing plan in place. You need to test your disaster recovery and business continuity plans. Because if you don't, they're just taking up paper and they're sitting on a shelf. And when things get bad and you try to pull them off the shelf and run them, they probably won't work. So you got to make sure that you test your disaster recovery and business continuity plans. Compromised availability. What does that mean? Denial of service, causing an outage. Denial of service basically means is your service is, well, quote unquote, denied, right? And how that happens is it could be from an external source that attacks your front-facing websites and shuts them down because it just overwhelms the data. It could be something internally to your network. That could be a misconfigured switch or router or whatever that's throwing all kinds of spurious packets throughout your network that's causing problems with all of the sensitive systems, which then in turn causes an outage. And that's the same thing as a denial of service, but it's just internal. The other thing is critical systems are unavailable. If you have a system that is critical to your business and it goes down for whatever reason, the wire's cut, it gets ransomware put on it, whatever, and it's not available, that's a denial of service as well. So again, you denied you from having access to your systems.